the conversation begins to happen. And as it happens, people begin to be more aware of what their potential and what their capacity is. It's important that I should say that we should never assume that it's happening. We should never assume that at one stage, which is what seems to have happened in our nation, we got to a stage in the early years where we now began to assume we seem to be making progress and we stopped facing direction that had to do with values.
You know, such assumptions are very key here. When you say you assume that we're making progress and year in, year out it's become perennial and traditional, we'll come back to the discourse and we hope that it will be different the next year, but we're still where we are at the moment. Going forward, perhaps, as you just highlighted, you did say that leadership can also start from anyone. Yes, especially those who think that they don't have the pedestal, the level to show leadership. How can these people change the discourse if we're not getting it from top to bottom? The average Nigerian who is there doing his own thing, how can he show leadership in his own small sphere?
I think there are several things that each of us need to do. Number one, we need to be, first of all, aware that we are more powerful than we think we are. And that sounds like an oxymoron, but it is true. Most people have a way of seeing themselves as not being sufficient to contribute to the environment. Everybody actually has some level of capacity to influence. You know, even in the family, the baby influences everybody in one way, first of all by crying. And when that cry becomes really, really disturbing, all of us stay awake and find out what's causing the baby. So even a baby has influence on the lives of people. And we've got to, so that's the first thing. The second is we've got to recognize that leadership is predominantly about our capacity to influence. And there are many things we need to use to influence. We need to find out how to affect. Thirdly, we need to recognize that if you do not you need to set yourself a big goal, a big, hairy, audacious goal. You might be a small person, but you can set yourself a big, hairy, audacious goal within your vicinity. For example, my big, hairy, audacious goal may be to be on channels. I have that opportunity to do so for now. But a man who is a vulcanizer might say, in the area where I vulcanize, I'd like to create a culture to affect the environment and change it. That might sound like his big, hairy, audacious goal. He'll be amazed as to how much power he has. And then fourthly, which is an area we have as a problem in Nigeria, is he's got to be willing to do the work. There are no shortcuts. There are no simplicities. For example, if you want to make a change, take a government, let me use that, because they are big, they have a big platform, so we can use them as good examples. If you are going to be pushing out a government in office, you need to have said, when we get there, these are our plans, because these are our targets. These are our big, hairy, audacious goals. What we've been seeing in the last 1 year is the evidence that didn't exist to a large extent. So when you come to your individual level, you're a teacher in a school. You have an opportunity to affect. Do you know, have you realized that most of us, if we look at people who influenced us the most in our lives, teachers tend to fill in the gap. One teacher you will remember. And it was just a small way of.
But how much of an impact is that making these days? Because, I mean, in other climes, you know, you see them, they have these institutes, political institutes, they groom, they teach leaders in terms of what to do, what to expect. Those who are vying for offices usually go to those institutions to maybe make their first speeches, their policy speeches, economic speeches. We don't have any such recognition of our institutions here.
No, we don't. And it's going to take us some time to get that. But we can start. That's my view. It's always, there is a principle in physics that says that the coefficient of static friction is always greater than that of dynamic friction. In other words, what it means simply is that starting is always more difficult than continuing. So we don't have to wait until the powers that be set those things up. Sometimes, like happens in channels, you start a sunrise program, and now when you call people who are in government position, they come and they sit down because they feel they got to justify and explain whatever, not all the time, but at least a lot of the time you get that happening. So we can, that same way that you're doing this in channels, we can enlarge people's perspectives, that they can begin to affect our society by simple things. All those things we're talking about in those societies, many of them were not even started by government. Many of them were started by individuals who started up ideas and began to propagate the ideas and repeat the ideas. And sometimes some of them are started as long as 200 years ago.
You know, many people always come on the show and they tell us, no, it happens in other climes. They like to make reference to all of those. But in some of those other areas, so they've got midterm elections,
yes,
say for the National Assembly. as a way to stir up that in us here. Do you think, because I see now that there's another electoral reform panel, or is it a committee that has been set up, should we be talking about maybe considering midterm elections in the National Assembly?
I'm not sure that will make too much of a difference if you look at the way
not even awakening their consciousness, people getting used to that kind of practice, voting, knowing more about what to do.
I'm not sure it will make it. I think our bigger challenge is not the electoral process. I think our bigger challenge is the concepts that have controlled government and ideas. Like I said, that's why I went back to saying we need leadership emergency.
How about how the people emerge, the leaders?
That's part of it. But the people are emerging because people are only voting according to the level of their understanding. When people, let me use an example from another clime. In the US election, that's presidential campaign that's going on now. One of the challenges why you will find out that someone like Trump is getting so much of support from the uneducated white working class people is because their levels of understanding of the complexities of what has happened in society is so low that they just decided, I'm suspicious of everything. So we have got a responsibility in Nigeria, first of all, to begin to teach people what leadership is, to begin to teach people what their responsibility is in driving leadership, and to teach people where leadership starts from, basically. If you do that, I'll give you a simple example. I was in a meeting once, and I just happened to be sitting in the meeting. At that time I was much younger. I wasn't this age. So it wasn't that they respected me for age. I'm still not old, but it wasn't as if they respected me for age at the time. But somebody was driving an agenda, and I just got up and made a simple one comment, and suddenly the whole agenda changed. And yet I was a young boy. So sometimes that influence is what we need to do. If we start that situation, and then we begin to say, look, that's why I keep on talking about election emergency. It's the sound bite of it. Say, I agree, the president needs to agree that we have a gap. Starting from him, to be honest. And say we have a leadership problem. If he doesn't agree, I am announcing it. We have a problem. I don't need to wait for the president to announce it. I can come on channels and tell you we have a leadership gap. Most of the people in our leadership do not understand what leadership is about. So we have a leadership gap. And those following behind are aping them. That's the problem. They think that what they are doing is leadership. So they want to do what they are doing. So we need to start staying in place like channels. That is not leadership. Leadership is something that requires your capacity to influence people, and also that it's not automatic. You need to work on it, which is the other part I was making. If you want to get into leadership, you need to have studied. You need to have found out what it's about. You need to have read. You need to find out. Alexander the Great, as far as 400 years before Jesus, was reading the books of great leaders of his time to find out what they did right. It's not accidental. Mark,
Well, it's amazing that you say that people need to prepare. You never can remove the role of preparation, but then you also have to ask, only recently, let's take for instance this new program that was launched by the government, Change Begins With Me. It would look like that's one of the things that they were trying to pass down, but a lot of people, it wasn't properly received. What do you think was wrong with that message?
The message ended up sounding like a soundbite. Everybody knows change begins with me. When this government came into power last year, I did some podcasts on YouTube where I was talking about the challenge of change. And I said the number one challenge of change is identifying what change you expect. The number two challenge of change is identifying what that change is supposed to achieve. You see, because you don't change yourself until you have a motivation to change. Change is not a matter of preaching. It's a matter of motivation. If a man smokes and decides I'm going to stop smoking, he needs to have a motivation to stop smoking. It's not a statement that stops him from smoking. So the problem with that launched thing that said change begins with me is that it didn't define what change was where I am now, where I need to get to, and then why. I've always said it. In fact, the most important one is the why. Why do I need to make a change? Because what is it going to achieve? So if you just say change begins with me, sounds very nice. What kind of change?
All right, Mr. Obayan, I appreciate your comment on this morning. Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Adetokunbo Obayan is a leadership consultant. We've been talking about that as we also reflect on our 56th independence anniversary. We will be back in a moment to join us again.